Amen. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Well, this is the third lesson in our series based on the stories we find in the book of Exodus. And as we read and discuss, we are looking for the helpful, practical lessons, the personal meanings and the metaphysical interpretations. And we are using the works of Unity co-founder Charles Fillmore as reference material, as well as Reverend Bob Brummett's book, Finding Yourself in Transition. The subtitle of Reverend Brummett's book is Using Life's Changes for Spiritual Awakening. His book focuses on the changes that we all face in life. The Exodus story is about the Hebrew people, or the Israelites. And I should have included this. The Hebrews and Israelites, the writers use those words, those names interchangeably. Hebrew, you could say, is the racial name, and as opposed to the Israelites, which is more of a family name. The Exodus focuses on these people and their captivity, their bondage, their slavery in Egypt. The story is about their 40 years in the wilderness, as Moses leads his people as they transition from the bondage of slavery into freedom. Still, as many have discovered, just because a person is free, it does not mean their lives are without challenge. Freedom does not guarantee fulfillment. The Exodus is also about the Hebrew people and their transition from the freedom of 40 years in the wilderness to the fulfillment of the promised land. So the Exodus is not a single event. It is a process from freedom to fulfillment, and from slavery to freedom, and freedom to fulfillment. But as we've discussed, the Exodus is about more than some ragtag Hebrews running around in the desert. The Exodus is also our story, and the changes that we all go through in our journey from sense consciousness to the freedom of self-awareness. In this transition, we learn what freedom means, and we learn about the law of mind action. Thoughts held in mind produce after their kind. The Exodus is about our transition as we learn to leverage that freedom into the fulfillment of our own promised land. Like the children of Israel, the Exodus is not a single event for us either. It is a process. It is a process as we move from the slavery of our own useless and unnecessary suffering to freedom as we learn to use the law of mind action and move from that freedom into our personal fulfillment, the promised land, where we have what we want to have, do what we want to do, and experience what we want to experience. The transition from slavery to freedom and freedom to fulfillment, these are processes, but in our quick fix culture, we don't always understand or appreciate the nature of those processes. We want what we want, and we want it now. It's like the old prayer, God, grant me patience, but give it to me now. There's an old joke among ministers, never pray for patience, because God will give you plenty of opportunities to practice it. Last week we left off in our story in Exodus chapter 2. Moses, the child of Hebrew slaves, but adopted by Pharaoh's daughter, was raised in the royal court of Egypt. And one day he went out to his people and saw their forced labor. He sees an Egyptian beating a Hebrew. Moses kills the Egyptian and then hides the body in the sand. And last week I asked the question, are we hiding our Egyptians in the sand? Do we try to hide or cover our mistakes? Do I have a mistake that I thought was long buried, but now it seems I must deal with it? Or do we acknowledge our mistakes? Do we work with them, learn from them? Now, we don't have to publicize our mistakes, but one way or the other, it's best to come to terms with those experiences and make peace with them. Moses tries to hide his mistake. He buries the Egyptian in the sand, but then he learns that his effort to keep it a secret hasn't worked. Moses went out the next day, and he sees two Hebrews fighting with each other. And he says to the one that he perceives to be in the wrong, he says, "Why do you strike your fellow Hebrew?" And this guy asks Moses, "Who made you ruler and judge over us? Do you mean to kill me like you did the Egyptian?" Oh boy. Moses realizes he's in trouble. The whole thing's been found out. She says, "Surely this thing is known." And again, instead of dealing with his mistake or even hiding from it, he chooses to run away. Moses flees from Egypt and Pharaoh's wrath, and he settles in the land of Midian. Now, we can interpret Midian as domination, supreme authority, and sovereignty. The dominion of Midian is the inner consciousness that we must obtain through the discipline of our minds. Moses flees Egypt because of his lack of self-control and mental discipline. Through the inner consciousness he learns in Midian, he transitions, he changes to a place of self-control, a place of mental discipline. Last week we discussed the 3 40-year periods of Moses' life. I said that 40 years represents the period of time needed to complete a specific task. In Moses' first 40 years, his time in the royal court of Egypt was the first 40-year period interpreted as his time of intellectual preparation. As he flees into Midian, we enter into the second 40-year period of time, a time of spiritual preparation. When Moses gets to Midian, he assists 7 daughters of the priest of Midian. Here in chapter 2, his name is Reuel, but in other places he's called Jethro. Now, how do we account for 2 different names for this guy? 2 different writers. 2 different writers, each preserving their own version of the story. Moses helps the daughters, and one of them, named Zipporah, takes Moses home to meet dear old dad, Reuel, or Jethro, the priest of Midian. Moses marries Zipporah, and they have a son, Gershom. And Moses will eventually have 2 sons with Zipporah, but none of them play a significant role in the story. The writers just kind of move right past them. So Moses goes to work for his father-in-law as a shepherd. Now, while he's living in Midian, Moses works for Jethro, the priest of Midian, for another 40 years. And these 40 years are his time of spiritual preparation. As a shepherd, there is time for contemplation. Moses learns to discipline his mind. He learns to establish dominion and control over his thoughts, his words, and deeds. In chapter 3, Moses was keeping the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian, and he is led, and he leads his flock beyond the wilderness, and he came to Mount Horeb, the mountain of God. Now, some biblical writers call it Mount Horeb, and some writers call it Mount Sinai. Again, two different writers, each preserving their own version of the story. Mount Horeb or Sinai is a real place. You can go there today. It's at the southern point of the Sinai Peninsula, and there's a monastery there on Mount Sinai named St. Catherine's. It's on my bucket list. While Moses was there on Mount Sinai, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire out of a bush. And he looked, and the bush was burning, but not consumed. Now we can interpret fire. Whenever we see fire in the Bible, we can interpret that as a manifestation of the presence of God. Fire is a symbol of the active presence, God's active presence. George Lamsa, who did some fine work with translations of Aramaic Bible texts, George Lamsa says that a bush represents difficulty. You ever snag your clothing on a bush? A bush represents difficulty. Moses will have difficulty. But Dr. Lamsa says that because the bush was burning but not consumed, it means that Moses will triumph over that difficulty. Moses hears his name coming out of the burning bush. Moses, Moses. And Moses responds, "Here I am." And the angel tells Moses, "Take off your sandals. Uncover your understanding. For the place on which you are standing is holy ground." And you know what? No matter where you are standing, it is always holy ground. You are holy. The voice says, Exodus 3:6, "I am the God of your ancestors. I am the God of Abraham. I am the God of Isaac and Jacob." In unity, we acknowledge the I am as the presence of God within us, the Christ presence within us all. Moses hears that voice, and he hears it say, "I have observed the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard their cry because of their taskmasters. Indeed, I know their sufferings." God's presence within us is aware of the useless and unnecessary suffering that we put ourselves through. The slavery, the oppression that we all force upon ourselves. The voice continues, Exodus 3:10, "Now go, I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt." Here, Moses receives the call, his commission, his assignment. He receives the call to free the Hebrew people. Now, I know that you are all in tune. You are all spiritual people. And when you receive your guidance, you follow through immediately. You say, yes, Lord, and you drop whatever you're doing, and you follow your guidance, and you do what God calls you to do. Isn't that so? Well, Moses does exactly what many of us do. He begins to question God and make up excuses. Moses asks God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? Moses says what many of us say when we hear the call, you can't mean me, can you? I'm not a leader. I don't have the training. I don't have the education. I don't have whatever excuse we're going to make. Moses says to God, if I come to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your ancestors has sent me to you, and they ask me, what's his name? What shall I say to them? Now, we've talked about the various names for God. If Moses goes to the people and says, God sent me to get you out of Egypt, and they ask him, which God? Okay, if I say to you, okay, everybody, after the service today, I want you to all follow me out to Holmes Lake. We're going to walk across Holmes Lake. Come on, let's go. God said it would be okay. God, we're all supposed to walk across Holmes Lake. You ready to follow me? At least one of you should say, wait a minute, Reverend Evan. Let me check with my God to see if this is okay. Moses says, when they ask me, what's your name? What shall I tell them? Exodus 3:14. God says to Moses, I am that I am. Or, depending on your translation, I am who I am. I am that I am. I am who I am. Sounds very mystical, doesn't it? Well, this lesson is already getting a little long. I hate to leave it off here. But you know, the mind can only absorb what the butt can tolerate. But we're going to pick this up again, I promise. I want to close today with the song we sang in meditation. I am that I am. And I put that up on the PowerPoint again, if you could get that back up. Sent me to this now moment. Here I am that I am. Has sent me to this now moment. Here I am. God bless you all. Well, this is our opportunity, yours and mine, to pour out the gift of God from within us through our tithes and our love offerings. And can we share this offertory blessing together? Divine love flowing through me blesses and multiplies all that I am, all that I have, all that I give and all that I receive. I am joy-filled and grateful. Thank you, God. And you can send your gifts, your tithes, your love offerings to paypal.me/UnityLincoln. That's paypal.me/UnityLincoln. Or you can send the gifts through the mail or through a bank transfer by sending them to Unity Lincoln, P.O. Box 30209, Lincoln, Nebraska 68503. Or you can go to our webpage at unitylincoln.org, and there you will find a convenient link to donate via PayPal. And remember to like us on Facebook and subscribe on YouTube. And give and God gives it back to you. Give and God gives it back to you. Give and God gives it back to you. Pressed down, shaken together, running over, back in good measure. God gives it back to you. Sing it over, give and God gives it back to you. Give and God gives it back to you. Give and God gives it back to you. Pressed down, shaken together, running over, back in good measure. God gives it back to you. Scooby-Dooby-Dooby-Doo. Yes, indeed. And let us share this affirmation for our church family. Together, Unity Lincoln is blessed to draw the people, funds, and all that is required for the health and growth of our community and peace in the world, heart to heart. And we are getting very close to achieving our goal of $30,000